Good evening, Mayor and Council. It is now 7 p.m. and we are live online.
Thank you. Welcome. This is the City Council workshop for September 9th. And we'll start with roll call. I see Molly and Amber and Paloma and Dan. And Lee, you're online?
I am.
Okay.
Good evening.
And Jeff
And Jeff.
Demansky is excused tonight.
Okay, and Jeff Demansky is excused. I was actually, after I did that last week. And we will start into our workshop agenda items. We have the proposed naming of Veterans Memorial Building Plaza as First Lieutenant Francis G. Petey Square. Chris and
Yeah, I would just introduce, we've invited John McEnroe, who's representing the Veterans Memorial Building Organizations, to come speak to us. John and his colleagues have been pivotal in renovating the memorial building. You know, the whole front plaza was redone beautifully. And at that time, they had talked about naming the plaza. In your packet, you have a letter requesting this naming and also a copy of the city's naming policy. And that requires the City Council to name any public property that is proposed for renaming and approve that. So we've invited John to come and talk about naming the front of the building as First Lieutenant Francis G. Petey Square and why that should be considered. So I'll just turn it over to John McEnroe, and thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for having me all. As Chris said, I'm John McEnroe. I'm representing the Veterans Memorial Building. Mr. Swanson asked that I come here this evening to talk with you guys and provide a little background on First Lieutenant Francis Gerard Petty and why we seek to memorialize him in the naming of the frontage of the Veterans Memorial Building. I'd like to kind of frame my comments under kind of the greater theme of volunteerism, which is the reason we chose Petty to be our the namesake of the front of our building. And I'd like to commend you guys again for being involved in the community and getting out and putting yourselves out there and getting elected. The guardians at the Memorial Building recognize and appreciate volunteerism wherever it happens to live, whether or not we agree on each and every item that we encounter as we go through life. You know, we need to have decent and honorable discourse. I'm a horrible reader. I would much rather talk, just use these as notes. When we talked about dedicating the square in honor of Lieutenant Petty, VFW Commander Harold Delamater observed that Petty came from a family that embodies the virtues of honor and volunteerism and dedication. Their son Francis not only answered his nation call shortly after the attacks of December 7th. We've got too many sevens these days. But he also answered Beacon's call as a volunteer firefighter before he went off to war. Petty enlisted in the United States Army on 8 January 1942, just over a month after the attacks on Pearl Harbor. He attended officer candidate school and was commissioned as a second lieutenant and trained as a bombardier. He was assigned to the 43rd Bombardment Group near Port Moresby in New Guinea and flew aboard B-17 Flying Fortresses, conducting missions over New Guinea and New Britain. After his promotion to first lieutenant, he was reassigned to the 65th Bomber Squadron, where he continued to fly dangerous combat missions. On one such mission over the Bismarck Sea, his plane was shot down, and he was declared dead on 26 June 1943. First Lieutenant Francis G. Petty was awarded the Silver Star with Oak Leaf Cluster, which indicates that he was awarded this medal twice, which is what the Oak Leaf Cluster means. And it is the third highest military medal for valor that the nation bestows. He was also awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Air Medal, the Purple Heart, and the Bronze Star, which is the fourth highest medal for valor. It's our contention that the council has the authority to rename the lawn area in front of the Veterans Memorial Building in Lieutenant Petty's honor. It's our contention that in so naming the square, the council recognizes the historical cultural, and social significance of the past informing the future. I'm sorry?
You can go ahead. I think you just
Please.
need to mute.
I think that was a mistake.
We believe that this name and Lieutenant Petty's deeds engender a strong and positive image of fidelity, which will encourage similar volunteerism. We believe that this recognition will have a lasting and enduring importance to the community. We believe that this name will encourages significant recognition of volunteerism in the city of Beacon. We believe that the name is identified with a major achievement, assuring the ongoing safety of the nation, and we believe that the name is suitable and appropriate given its location and proximity to the Veterans Memorial Building. We do believe that the name will have value and will enhance the identity of the square for generations to come. Lieutenant Petty resided in the city of Beacon his entire life, absent his World War II service, and he's buried in the old St. Joachim Cemetery. The name of the square is unique, it's simple to pronounce, and does not duplicate any existing location in the city. And I'd be happy to entertain any of your questions.
Yeah, so it was Memorial Day when the sign was put up for Lieutenant Petty in
Yes.
front of so we already have a sign up there, and there was a very nice ceremony for that. And then I think you mentioned this as well, but this is really the request of all, the VFW in its entirety. There's, several different, I guess, memberships in the building, but everyone has agreed that this is
Correct.
the path that they would like.
We have 5 organizations that call the building home. It's the American Legion, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, the Marine Corps League, the Non-Knights of America, and Guardian Revival.
Thank you.
And so we're all in agreement.
Wonderful, thanks.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you share a little bit more about his service as a volunteer firefighter here in Beacon? Is there any information you have about that, or you've been able to dig up?
I do not. On Memorial Day, there was a emerita firefighter that gave a history and went through his entire civic career. I don't have it.
Great, thank you.
We do understand he was a member of the Tompkins Hose, because there was something hanging in the old facility with some of his medals, I think.
Yeah, so we acquired their Tompkins Hoses memorial to Petty that included his medals, some identity documents, a firefighter's badge, and I believe a religious medal of some sort.
And one other point of interest, because he was shot down, his remains were not recovered until 1984. So, and that's how he's interred at St. Joachim's. So.
I was just wondering if you were wanted to put additional signage up or just what's there?
No, ma'am, we would like you to adopt what we've already done.
Okay.
I noticed that one of the questions as part of our policy was permission from next of kin for naming. I assume that's been achieved, and I'm also just curious if he still has any descendants or family in the area, or
We
if you
don't
know
believe
that.
there's any in the immediate area. We spoke with, I'm not sure, I think it was a second cousin or a third cousin, who was like, yeah, we're glad you're doing this, but it's much the way many of us would kind of refer to a distant and long gone relative.
Mm-hmm.
We don't believe that there's any living family in the Beacon or the Hudson Valley area.
I was just
So,
curious, so thank
John?
you.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Paloma, did you have something? I can wait.
Go ahead, Lee.
Okay, thanks. Hey, John, I just want to compliment you and the 5 organizations on the partnership that we've had over the last 4.5 years. When I got in as mayor, one of the things I asked is that, that we work together, that we try to use the building for as many community things as was appropriate, knowing that the best way to honor veterans was just to have the building used and to have our community come through and understand the importance of veterans in our community. And I just want to say it's been a great partnership. I think we have done we collectively together have done more to renovate and upgrade the building in the last 5 years than was probably the last 20. And I just want to compliment the organizations and your leadership.
Thank you.
One last thing. You say Petty is easy to pronounce, but of course I said Petey through the entire ceremony back at Memorial Day. So yeah, it's easy, but doesn't look that way.
My experience in that building is nobody listens when anybody else talks anyway, so I wouldn't worry about it.
Yeah, well, I have to
You guys
say,
are so lucky you don't have the same view of yourselves that I have of me at the moment.
I know it's I have to say I don't have any objections to moving forward with the request that's been presented. You know, the signage is already there. I think several of us were at the Memorial Day ceremony, so we got to hear kind of the extended version of Lieutenant Petty's service to Beacon and to the nation. So, and as it is the request of the building and all of those who inhabit it, I certainly have no concern with the proposal.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have some just questions about the policy itself. We happen to actually have 3 people sitting here who were part of forming it, and it's a very rigorous and robust policy. So while I concur that I think this particular naming makes sense, there are just a couple things I wanted to make sure. There seemed to be, I wasn't clear whether or not the naming of a square is the same as a secondary naming of a street, which is brought up a lot in the policy, and if we just make sure, because there were a couple of things around asking the Beacon Historical Society to review if that's something we need to take that step before we approve it. And there was also something about wanting the name to be short enough that might be more for fire department purposes and for names, so it might not be relevant for this. So I just want to make sure, again, not about the naming of this, but just make sure that I assume you put this policy in place for a reason, and just wanting to be sure that we follow that as much as possible.
Yeah, I think this came up specific, oh, sorry, Dan, but I think it was Scalza, right? The
Henry Street,
Yep.
yeah.
So this specifically came up when there was a request about naming for Henry Street by the Scalza family, and that was done. There's a secondary name on that street now. And at the time, we, I think collectively said, hey, this is a really interesting request. Obviously, it was merit-worthy, but we didn't really have anything to determine what was merit-worthy. And so that's where the roots of the policy. And I think that really our frame at that point was more of the secondary street naming and more of the kind of, making sure it wasn't confusing for emergency services. I don't think that necessarily applies here because it's limited to the area in front of the VFW. It's not renaming, Main Street or Teller. It's kind of just commemorating the square where the VFW is. So I would say the intention probably doesn't apply here. And I think the point about the Historical Society is really good, but again, I'm kind of basing some of my decision-making on the Memorial Day activities, where there was a very extensive ceremony and discussion of Lieutenant Petty, so I feel like that has also been covered.
Right, I'm wondering if if there's a way to get some of that into the record. I don't know if we know who that individual is, and just have it submitted as supplementary, so that way if people have a question as to why did you approve this name as appreciate he's a firefighter and did service, just so we have that.
We can try to get that and put it into the resolution so that you actually have everything.
That would be,
right
I think
there.
that would be great.
Does that sound right?
Oh, Dick Murphy from the Historical Society?
No, the guy who spoke on Memorial Day.
Oh, I was thinking maybe there was something in the archives. Okay. But yeah, I know there was an extensive program around Lieutenant Petty, so
Yeah, I
I
remember
imagine
that
there's
as well.
already.
Yeah.
I think a part of it too was just a question of if we honor, one veteran by giving a second name to Henry Street, what were we going to do going forward? So people didn't just start bringing us a second name for every street in Beacon, and I think we wanted to just kind of have, some guardrails for ourselves.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And I think in the presentation that we heard at the council tonight, you certainly touched on the components of the naming policy in your commentary. And again, I really appreciate your perspective. Not everybody was at the Memorial Day ceremony, so kind of having that backup material, which I'm basing some of my decision-making off of, would be good for the record.
Great, thank you. Nick, have you been following along? Is there anything from your perspective in looking at the policy that you think we're running afoul of, or you think it's fine?
No, I think it's fine. The only question I had was item C, which Paloma had mentioned regarding approval of the family, if that was possible. And as Mr. McEnroe said, they've looked into that and it's not possible. Other than that, I find this request to be documented and consistent with the policy adopted in 2020.
I had one other question about the policy overall, not, again, a question of this naming in particular, but in one section it does say that honorary street names will be reviewed every 15 years. I wasn't sure if that is being tracked at all. I actually have no idea how many honorary street names we have at the moment.
I was thinking the same thing.
I was thinking I would be here in 15 years.
We hope
You'd
you
be
are.
welcome back.
I can say there is one that's older than Scalzo. It's Morgan on the block of South Avenue from Main Street to Beacon. And that was a little bit earlier, but that still hasn't hit 15 years.
There are two squares that I'm familiar with. There's one by Hudson Beach Glass, and for the life of me, I can't remember the name.
I think one is Dugan and one is Maddie Cooper, maybe.
I think it's Matty Cooper. There's also a Digger Phelps.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Then I think there's a Perry.
Well, those are actual street names, though.
But those are actually street
Yeah, the
names,
actual street, they're not
Oh,
honorary.
yeah.
Yeah. All right. I had the same question too. I was like, oh, are we doing this? And given the expression on Chris's face, I'm going with something we follow up with later.
Put it in the hopper.
This one, we don't have to install
right,
the
right.
sign and replace the sign, so I'm fine with it.
Yes.
I'm not thrilled about doing other signs around Main Street. You know, like we already struggle to keep the signs in good shape.
All right, well, I think we're all in agreement to move forward positively.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And so, John, if you can email me the background on First Lieutenant Petey, we'll get that
His
in
civilian
the,
background.
yeah,
Yeah.
anything that you have, and we can draw that up into the resolution for Monday.
Be happy to.
Cool. Thanks so much.
Thanks, John.
Thanks so much.
Great.
Have a good evening, all.
You too.
Is there any way to get the online sound a little louder for us?
Yeah.
I've asked Pete to try to get that up,
Okay, so
and he
I'm
came
coming, I was
in.
thinking.
We'll try again.
Okay. Here he comes.
Yeah, a
A
little
little
bit more. It's hard to hear.
Oh,
Uh-oh.
oh no.
Thanks, Pete.
All right, next on the agenda, proposed local law concerning the Fishkill Creek Development District. Nick?
Yeah, Nick's gonna do this.
Thank you. Good evening. So this
Oh.
concerns 248 Tyranda Avenue. The council may recall that it received a request to modify the concept plan
Do you want it louder,
from
Pam?
a
I think that's
non-residential
good.
building.
Okay, it's
That's
good.
a thumbs up.
Okay.
Very good. So this concerns there was a request from the applicant, the owner of 248 Tyranda Avenue, the residential project with a mixed-use building, a commercial building, excuse me, to modify the concept plan to allow a residential use where non-residential is currently required, and also to allow a certificate of occupancy to be issued to buildings 100 and 200, which are currently constructed and ready to have the COs issued, whereas building 100, the non-residential, has had the foundation, but it's not yet being framed. So there are two parts of this, the local law and the concept plan amendment. The council has had two discussions on this. Both matters were referred to the county and the city planning board for review and comments that were discussed at your last workshop. And in the meantime, I've had discussions with the applicant, who has now retained counsel in addition with Labella. So Zarin Steinmetz has been brought in as counsel to work with Labella on the concept plan amendment. And in those discussions, they've asked us to pause the consideration of the concept plan amendment while they do additional work on marketing the non-residential component. They've indicated they've retained a different broker. There will be online advertising available. And when I get that, I'll circulate to the council. And then we're going to be coming back to the council if needed, or they'll get a tenant there. So they are undertaking more aggressive marketing efforts than had been undertaken in the past. So the hearing on the concept plan amendment is not going to be held on the 16th, and there'll be a pause in the consideration of that part of the application while they do their marketing. The item that does remain before the council is the local law that you had that is on for a public hearing on the 16th. And we had discussed a local law that would have potentially modified what residential uses could be used, or what would be considered an incentive to allow a non-residential use to be waived. That's not part of a local law that is before you're being heard on the 16th, and that's not requested or needed at this time. The limited focus of a local law is to allow the issuance of a certificate of occupancy for the residential to be issued before the non-residential portion of the project is completed. So before you is the local law that amends section 223-41.14 to add a new sentence that reads, for good cause shown, the city council may, after a public hearing, allow certificates of occupancy to be issued for dwelling units or artist live workspaces prior to the non-residential component being completed. And that's the subject of a public hearing. When we drafted this, we had required or suggested there be a public hearing. I don't see the need for a public hearing now that we've reviewed this. When we were talking about waiving the non-residential, I thought a public hearing was appropriate. But if all the council is doing is considering a certificate of occupancy to be issued, and you do have public comment, I don't see the need for a public hearing. This is solely within the discretion of the council, and you're not modifying a site plan in terms of more or less residential units or any of that nature, which would have to go to the planning board. The number of units that would come online, as an example with this one, is 64 units of housing, which is something the applicant had said is for the good cause shown, and which the council had recognized more housing coming online is good. Also, on the tax generation side, it's being estimated to be about $5,000 in total taxes, city, school, and county per unit, which would be about $300,000 in tax revenue to the three taxing jurisdictions, with schools receiving about 60% of that roughly, the city 25%, and the county 15%. And so you have on for a public hearing on the 16th, a public hearing on this local law.
Nick, can I just clarify something you said? So we would need a public hearing for changing the local law, but if we did change it, what you're suggesting is we would not then need another public hearing to actually decide if, in the case of 248 Tioronda, we did think they met whatever good cause threshold we determined, and we could issue the CO for them.
That is correct, yes.
Okay.
You summarized that correctly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Yeah, I just wanted to add, and I think Nick said everything, which is the zoning that we passed for the Fishkill Creek Development Zone had multiple controls in place. And what we're finding with this one is we still retain full control, right? Because if the party doesn't, has a reason not to build a commercial component, they have to come back to council and get a concept plan approval. That gives us full control. And therefore, this piece, which would have been an additional control, is really first not necessary, and then second is harmful to the things we want, since it would keep us from generating tax revenue and would keep us from putting housing onto the market, which is, I think, both goals that we have. So we thought this was straightforward enough to bring to council. And as Nick said, the concept plan is being put off until the applicant puts their fact base together, and that would include marketing. All right, that's kind of where we were sitting. Thank you.
Thanks. And can someone remind me if we were to pass this law the way that it is written now, what compels the applicant to complete the project, the non-residential part of the project?
So if they don't, obviously they lose the revenue. Given that that was in their plans, I would assume that they would never build. As opposed to build commercial. I'm sure at this point in the marketplace, building commercial is tough, and that rather than not build commercial, they'd rather build something else. I don't see how they would come back and not complete a change of concept.
And they're already done with the foundation and I think the first floor.
No. No,
The foundation is,
there is no first floor.
well, the foundation then is already set, so there's quite a footprint there as you drive by.
I was having a problem with them, which must be built out before or concurrently with the residential development of the site, which I feel like this developer has gone against this already. And then I know the planning board, they would like to know what is the definition of good cause by the council. Because they don't feel just saying that our real estate agent couldn't find anything is that good cause? And they feel it kind of undermined all the work that the planning board had done in reviewing this project.
Well, I would add that you're bringing in two different
Yeah,
issues.
you're linking the two pieces.
Right, the
Yeah.
good cause here is for the waiver to allow the COs to be issued, not to waive the requirement to build the non-residential.
Okay,
So they're not getting the waiver to not do the commercial. And it doesn't make sense from a financial point of view not to finish something there. The problem is, we're seeing with some of the projects that because financing is so tight, they're not getting finished. And again, look at just drive down Eliza Street.
Oh, I know.
Those condos are out of money, and that's what happens when you don't have enough money to finish a project. And he called me a year and a half ago when I said that and said, I'm going to finish the project. Well, he still hasn't finished it. So again, you have 64 units that could come on that generate $75,000 a year to the city, that generate water and sewer funds, and have 6 below market rent units because of our inclusionary zoning. We're kind of cutting our nose off to spite our face if we don't issue COs.
Not entirely, because this is all, the council didn't create this problem.
No, but I'm
So
just saying
I
you're,
think that conversation you're having with us is a conversation you should be having with the developer, is saying, well, there's 64 units that could be online with $75,000 in taxes, which I think we all agree we want.
Yeah, but Dan,
But why haven't they completed the project?
I think you could see a scenario where he can't finish the project if he can't get financing.
Mm-hmm.
If he doesn't have the cash flow through the first 2 buildings, the 3rd building might never get built, and the other 2 buildings might sit vacant. When we have families that need housing, we have city employees that are looking for below market rent units, and $75,000 next year wouldn't be coming to the city that we actually could use, very much so.
I agree. I guess I'm just wondering, why that falls on us. Like when other people are having a hard time working on doing their work, they don't come to city council for help.
What would you gain by not allowing it to move
Because
forward?
I think this is going to be a way to skirt the law. I think in the Fishkill Creek zone, if we put this language in, then everybody can build the residential projects and leave the non-residential unbuilt.
Nobody would willingly leave a building unbuilt unless they didn't have the capacity to finish it. So like if you make
But it's a way to
this,
get around the zoning. If you don't like the zoning, if you want to do a residential-only project, this law allows you to do that.
Dan, you literally could have a project that can't be finished. Do you want to have a vacant building down
I
there?
haven't seen evidence that the project can't be finished. Have
Well,
you guys?
No.
I'm sorry, hang on a second. So first of all, this narrow move, meaning to allow the residential component to get a CO, is really analogous to what we passed recently for the large project at Edgewater, which is they had finished components and they were asking for the ability to move forward to occupy those components. This market right now is such that major projects are going to fail. And I think the reason that we went ahead was we wanted the revenue from the existing components that were ready to go, and that there was no loss in moving forward. Now, Dan, your example of, well, they'll just never build the commercial component. Fine. And if there's an issue with that, we can insert into the law that if it's not built at a certain time by a certain point, they have to come back for a concept approval, which we can just deny. So we can build in some assurance that that will happen without needing the CO component to be in place. Because as Chris said, the CO component keeps us from receiving tax revenue, keeps affordable housing and regular housing from coming online, and threatens the overall project. So I don't think this is the right tool to do it. We can tailor the tool within the Fishkill Creek zone to get that concern put out of place.
Lee, can you say again, right at the beginning of what you just said, you compared it to another project where we did something similar? I didn't quite catch the name of that project.
So for Edgewater, right? It's a
Edgewater,
large
thank you.
project. They've got 7 buildings. Some of them are done, and what they wanted was to be able to start to occupy some of them without having to finish all of them. And that's pretty logical, and it's a normal component of large project zoning. We don't have a lot of large projects, so it wasn't in our zoning, but we did that recently to permit some of those buildings to come online for the developer to get their financing, partly taken care of as a result, and for us as a community to have both tax revenue and additional units and affordable units to come on.
And I ask this because maybe, okay, if I take away the circumstances of what we're looking at right now and just think about the change that's being proposed, regardless of the circumstances of the change, which I'll just say that I agree with everything the planning board said to this applicant. But I didn't find other instances in the code where we have this specifically called out. So in the example that you just gave, where Edgewater received their COs, was that something in the code that triggered that, or was it another relief mechanism?
It was in that case where the city allowed for there to be a subdivision, an internal lot subdivision. That's what allowed then Edgewater to proceed with the build out in phasing in that way. This is the only provision, the only type of district where this provision exists.
Okay.
In all other situations, you can get your CO whenever you complete a building in a multi-building property.
Yeah, and I guess if I think about this, the example I was kind of thinking through when I was thinking about this was CMS. So you've got residential on, say, your second and third floor, and your commercial on the first floor. In that case, if somebody was coming in and saying, hey, I have my residential units done, but I don't have a tenant downstairs yet, can I get a CO for the residential? What would we do?
That happens. I know for some of the projects, 344 Main Street, one example is where the residentials were built out and there wasn't a commercial tenant, so they obviously built the space because it's the bottom floor, but they didn't finish it out, and the CO wasn't granted, but for the commercial space on the first floor, but it was for the residential units.
And that did not need code? Did that go through the zoning board, or I'm trying to understand why this has to be a code change, or if there is some other relief valve that could be used here.
Well, we have a relief, it's because, and this is the only section of the code where this language is drafted. It's in the Fishkill Creek that says you have to complete the non-residential at the same time as the residential.
Yeah.
That doesn't exist in any other district.
Okay, and I think maybe that kind of goes back to the first thing that Pam said, which if this, and again, I'm trying to separate the circumstances of the applicant and what is the right thing to do from a coding perspective, but it certainly sounds like the applicant has not built out concurrently as the code requires, or else we wouldn't be in this situation.
Correct. Right.
So what happens when, it doesn't have anything to do with what we're voting on, but what happens when a developer does not build per code?
Well, you've built in here the standard for good cause shown. It's solely in your discretion as to whether they've met your criteria as to whether or not the requirement to have the non-residential built before the residential is completed should be waived or not.
Right, again, this was the language of the FCD zone. This is the only place that we have this, right? The language was there for multiple ways to ensure that the commercial component was taken care of. Again, we have multiple avenues. We don't need this one to get it done. And this one is standing in the way of taxpayer revenue, housing for the community, and affordable housing. So I just can't see why there isn't sufficient controls in place with the approval of the concept plan for us not to move forward. I don't think this is about a particular applicant. I think this is about the only place in our zoning that has this restriction in place. The example that Amber gave on Main Street says, there isn't an exception like that. And so you're building out something and one part's ready and the other part doesn't have a tenant. You can get a CO. This is the only one where you can't. And again, we have the ability to control that commercial component through our concept.
I have maybe a stupid question. If we're requiring that the residential and the commercial be built concurrently, have we not written a sort of self-contradiction in the law by saying the residential can be occupied before the non-residential is completed?
Well, that's, I think, what we're trying to amend the zoning to allow, right? We also built into the zone that they can come for a, for a waiver of the commercial component. That also is a contradiction of the zoning, or it's just another way to look at how we were trying to make it work, right?
Right, so the code as initially drafted did provide for a waiver of the non-residential. So I don't think allowing the certificate of occupancy is affecting that. It's just allowing the staging of this to be done differently. And again, you've got to be satisfied.
Nick, your audio, can you look at your mic when you're speaking? Your audio is very difficult to hear.
Lee's is a little choppy too, yeah.
Sorry about that.
No, I think it's the Zoom.
Sorry, Nick, could you start over with what you were saying?
I can. I think I'm trying to break it down into a couple of separate issues. The first is the code already recognizes that you may be faced with a situation where you waive the non-residential so it wouldn't be required. This change is just to allow the COs to be issued for the residential. That's the change in the law. You then, if the law is adopted, would then have to have the applicant demonstrate to your satisfaction that there is good cause shown. So I think I'm hearing more of a concern about whether good cause can be shown, which is the second question when the applicant comes before you, versus having a provision in the code that gives you that safety valve to, should the good cause be shown, where you would allow a CO to be issued. I think they're two separate.
This is sort of getting at the sort of base, like 101 question that I heard the planning board asking us back, which is how do we define good cause?
Yep.
And what I'm hearing from other folks, and what also makes sense to me, is that part of the good cause shown is showing a good faith effort to complete the project as approved, and that includes having actually constructed both projects concurrently. That includes the actual effort to market and sell the commercial side, or whichever side is not being done concurrently. But I'm curious what other thoughts folks might have in that direction, and that might get us to the answer.
I think you nailed it. I think if I am struggling with this, and again, I'm trying to separate the specific circumstance from the broader question, but I do think that point that was made, and this is one of the questions I wanted to ask, does it behoove us to define what we think good cause is, or do we want to leave it vague? There's pros and cons to both. Mm-hmm. And then, to I think what Dan was asking is then, like, is there something else that we could put in as a way to say, like, maybe it's a timing thing. Maybe it's within a certain time after this, you have to have done X, Y, or Z, because we do want people to complete their projects, and we do want people to do what they said they were going to do. And I think that's a really important component of what we want to achieve here.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, though, we're spending too much time talking about the issue that's not on the table, which is how would we define the good reason for allowing commercial to be replaced by something else, and maybe that there's some time frame associated with that. And we're not focusing on, okay, that's coming, we're going to get to it. I think we should take some notes as to what we're interested in. But then the immediate issue on the table is, do we want this lever, which precludes tax revenue, housing, and affordable housing, to be, removed as the only or the lever that we're going to impose in addition to all the other levers? I just don't see it.
Is there another project on the docket other than the example we keep trying to not think about that we should be considering in terms of there being a time crunch? Or a particular urgency to pass this piece of the puzzle?
So Edgewater was taken care of through the subdivision approach to the issue. I don't think there's anything large coming forward. There are other parcels right on Fishkill Creek, but they're not in process right now.
Right.
Given their distance from downtown, they're likely to have a similar issue of what's the commercial component that can logically go there.
So maybe, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I ask because I would be inclined to sort out all of the pieces of the puzzle before pulling the trigger on this one, because I do see the ways in which they're contingent on each other, functionally, even if they're not legally.
If you see them, please explain them to me, because I don't see them. Again, we have full control through the concept plan. We have the opportunity to alter the Fishkill Creek zoning for any further details that we want to do. This is simply saying that the lever of not issuing a CO for housing is not the necessary element. I don't see the connection. So if you see it, could you show it to me?
My main area that I see is the lack of definition of good cause shown. I don't think I'd be able to make a decision about whether or not good cause is shown without having clarity about the full process the developer has gone through to get to the point of them defining
And I think that's going
good
to be
cause
decided on, sorry for the interrupt.
That's okay, go ahead. I think I was done.
I was going to say, we drafted it that way because it's one of those things in drafting where if we start to define good cause shown, we're either limiting you or we're not including everything, or we're guiding them down a path and sort of boxing you in. So good cause shown is the broadest possible way to give you the most discretion. So I view that as favorable to you, and different situations could be different. So I think we want to give you that flexibility. So the information you're asking for is something when a request comes to you, I would tell the applicant, I need to hear X, Y, and Z, and give them their homework.
Yeah, Nick, that's a question that I had wanted you to answer that I asked earlier, so thank you, about whether it is in our interest to define what good cause is or not, because I see it both ways, and that's part of where I'm feeling conflicted. If we define good cause, and it's 4 things, and the applicant meets those 4 things, we have no choice but to say yes, even if we think it's still a crappy thing to do. So, but then it's kind of like, okay, do we have enough, if we leave it vague, do we have enough, does that give us enough authority to say, no, we don't want to because of X, Y, and Z, and is that sufficient?
Nick, can I ask as a follow-up question? Sorry, go ahead, Lee.
Yeah, just the issue on the table is, remember, right now there is absolutely no discretion in the way that Nick has written it. It gives us the absolute discretion to move forward with the housing, right? And absent an action on this, we have no discretion. We absolutely won't get the housing and won't get the tax revenue. So I think it's, again, separable, which is why we brought it forward.
And would we be able to put conditions on that?
Yes, and I can even build that in here, that the note I had made, we could add, for good cause shown, the city council may allow certificates of occupancy to be issued upon such conditions as the council may impose for dwelling units prior to the commencement. So yes, you would have the ability to impose conditions.
That might solve it.
Nick, from a legal perspective, let's say we pass this into law and then we happen to take up a case which we're apparently not talking about as our first example of good cause. How do we know that won't set precedent legally for future applicants? Because we'll probably, I would assume one of our first steps would be to set what we are going to use as our criteria for any applicant that might happen to come to us for this C of O discretion. And so I'm just wondering if we aren't actually de facto setting those good cause terms from a legal perspective.
And just before you answer, Nick, I'm sorry if I've like set some kind of bar that doesn't need to be set. I was simply saying that in my decision-making, I've been trying to think about this at the broader level versus the specific circumstance. So thinking about it in both ways, I think you're certainly allowed to think about it in the circumstance that's on the table. I didn't mean to set this like thing that we couldn't, talk about it.
My question still stands because it is about precedent beyond any applicant that might happen to come to us first.
Again, the fact that we've defined it so broadly for good cause shown, it gives you a broad authority. Someone is certainly going to argue if you grant it this way, you should look at what you did before, and that has some precedential value. But it's not binding upon you, and it really comes down to when we draft the resolution, should you approve it, where we set forth that these are the factors unique to this property, right? Property is unique, circumstances are unique, whether it's 1 acre, 7 acres, traffic comes into play, market conditions. So I think it's incumbent upon us when we draft any resolution that you would consider to explain the uniqueness of it. But, so does it create binding precedent? No. Of course someone's going to argue, well, you granted it there, you should do it here. But you're not bound by like the ZBA, which is acting as a quasi-judicial proceeding. Here you're acting in a legislative capacity, so you have more discretion than the ZBA would.
Paloma, does that give you what you need for a law? I'm not saying you have to vote for or against the law, but in terms of that you would feel comfortable then figuring out good cause for any particular applicant who came before us to implement that option?
No, I mean, it's an interesting argument. Thank you for helping me see it both ways about the benefits of defining good cause versus leaving it open. I guess I'm just also still thinking through if this is how this policy might be interpreted by a council 10, 20 years from now that's not us, that doesn't have the context that we've just hashed our way through, and are we setting that council up to make a good decision based off of the policy as written?
I would respond, Paloma, you're giving them as broad a slate as possible and giving them flexibility to deal with situations that may not be before us now or that we can't think of now, by using the language that's being proposed. And I think giving the council the express authority to impose conditions gives you some more control over the process. So you've granted yourself the ability to determine what good cause is, and you've also granted yourself the ability to impose conditions.
Yeah, I am much more comfortable with the addition that Amber suggested, that you verbalized, Nick. Thank you.
And again, this is on for a hearing on the 16th. On the local law.
This is what, on the 16th, you said?
Sorry. This is on for a public hearing on the local law next Monday.
There will be a public hearing on this, you said?
There would be a public hearing, correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think I'm comfortable moving forward to public hearing.
As
I
written.
definitely want to hear from the public. on this.
With the discussion that we had today about, with conditions and, yeah.
I will make the amendments that we discussed this evening, yes.
Thank you.
I'm curious, Dan, if you have any further thoughts at this point on where we're sort of heading.
I still think that this sentence undermines the law where that stipulates that the residential and non-residential have to be built concurrently. So we would have to have some kind of mechanism in here that ensures that the commercial ever gets built. And how maybe in this property the foundation is completed, but the next property and the property after that might look at this and say, oh, well, I know how to get around the residential. I'll just find, or how to get around the non-residential. I'll just have to follow their good cause criteria, and then I can ignore the zoning.
But I think with having good cause be broad, you could say, I will deny your request because you didn't actually follow the zoning to begin with, so I don't have good cause. I mean, I think leaving it discretionary would give you the ability to say, like, your lack of adherence to the zoning to begin with is troubling.
And then the hard thing is you're leaving 2 empty residential buildings,
Right.
not collecting taxes. However, Yeah, it's frustrating. I guess really, is it wise to have commercial in one building when you have residential in the other? Is it better to have a mixed use in
Yeah,
one building going
I think that's
forward?
a good point. Yeah. I mean, I guess I would say too that the flip side of this could be a person that has the commercial built out and hasn't done the residential yet. Like, again, just thinking about this in a little bit more,
Yeah.
again, I know there is an issue in front of us that I'm also keeping in mind, but thinking about it as more holistically, like, there are a lot of different circumstances that could apply.
Yeah, I had that question too. I don't think we need to change it for Monday or next Monday, but the idea that could we issue a C of O for a commercial space before, and I don't know if I see that we can build it before the residential, but I'm not sure about the C of O, so we might want to adjust that language.
Technically, it should be
Yeah,
concurrently.
it says before or concurrently for the commercial side.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But I don't know if the C of O could be issued, because we're going to have, eventually a rail trail likely past there, and maybe in some future land, there's some developer, some other place who's like, I have an immediate business I want to build, but the residential takes longer, because maybe the funding shifts for whatever reason, and for other sites as well. I'm thinking of ones south of here. So, so I think making sure, as been discussed, that the law that we create, if we do decide to pass something, can fit circumstances with any of the parcels that fall under this zoning.
I mean, is there one more adjustment that we want to make to allow us even more flexibility and future councils even more flexibility to potentially provide a CO for either side if one is not being built before the other?
Right, so when we get to that, should the law be adopted, one thing the council can consider, again, with the conditions, is given it's 64 units, maybe it's a limited number of units that get permitted while you evaluate the efforts to market. Maybe it's just one building, 32 units. So there are different ways we can look at this in terms of the conditions you would impose. And again, as a practical matter, I don't know if they're going to rent out all 64 units in 1 month, so you're giving them some relief so you can get the tax revenue in, get the housing on the market, and you're also making sure during that time that they are taking the additional steps. There could also be the situation where if you're required to build a building, you get the elephant in the room that can never be occupied, and so you force someone to build something that just doesn't make sense and can never be rented. And that's not going to be a good result either. So I think modifying the law makes sense. It's the question is that you're really wrangling with is, have they established good cause shown, and do you have enough facts to make that decision? So I really think we're on two separate discussions that are intertwined, given the way it was brought to you. But when we separate it, I think the law, well, as we've spoken through this, to give yourself that flexibility because a condition could exist, makes sense. But whether they can be satisfied is really where you're having a difficult time grappling with.
Yeah, and I appreciate you sharing at the beginning, Nick, that it sounds like the developer who this law might apply to first, that they are working with a new agency, it sounds like, or a new real estate person, so that they are continuing to work to try to make this feasible. So I did appreciate hearing that, and should we pass this law and they come before us to take it, I'm very curious to learn more about those efforts and what they're learning on the market.
For sure.
All right, so
I will make the edits discussed tonight, and it'll be on the hearing for the 16th.
okay, everybody's good with that?
I'm good with public hearing.
Okay.
And Nick, we'll need to adjourn the hearing again on the concept plan?
Yeah, I
or
had
do
a
you wanna
question. Do we
close
adjourn
that?
it or table it? If it sounds like they're going to take
Exactly,
time.
adjourn it without date, so it will need to be renoticed.
Okay, great.
I'll work with you, Chris, on the language for that.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you. All right, third item on the agenda, West Center Street Sidewalk Replacement Project.
Yes.
Chris?
So we have a bid coming back on a project to replace approximately 660 feet of sidewalk on the south side of West Center Street, running between South Avenue and the entrance, the far side entrance to our recreation center at 23 West Center Street. This is a project that's funded through the Community Development Block Grant. The reason it's going so late in the season is that the county didn't get federal contracts for the money until just the end of summer. and they are not advancing with any projects this year except for ours because we told them we'd get this done. In order to do that, we put the bid out. We have the bid coming back Wednesday. So I wanted to talk about the scope of the project, the funding, answer any questions, because when we come to you on Monday, we'll have a low bidder that we're going to ask you to award the project to. So this is exclusively on the south side. Ben, can you please put up the photos?
Yeah, it looks like it's between South Avenue and then maybe the end of our property, which is the rec department. Is that
Yes.
roughly the
Yes.
length?
And it's
So-
at Dynan, is that it?
Yeah, it's directly across from Dynan.
Okay.
So what you're looking at is the sidewalk on the south side of West Center Street. We identified this as one of the worst sections of sidewalk in that area, and for those that don't know this neighborhood, it's right around the corner from the new sidewalks we did last year on South Avenue. This is a key walking route from people coming out of South Avenue School going towards both the Housing Authority and the Recreation Center. Ben, can you do the other photos, please? So none of it meets ADA guidelines. It's very narrow. We have some magnificent sycamore trees on there, but they have completely destroyed the sidewalk. We're not taking out the trees. We'll be putting back a monolithic sidewalk and curb that's 5 feet wide. We are not touching the sidewalk on the other side, which is bad as well. What we're going to try to do is do this sidewalk and then assess what to do with that. That other side has 2 utility poles and a guy wire that are embedded right in the middle of the sidewalk, and there's absolutely no way for us to get ADA compliance. So we've had some discussion about just having the one sidewalk on the south side that's really good, and then actually maybe in future years taking out the other sidewalk and just establishing a clean curb line. Because as you go around the corner on School Street, which is the next block up from south, there's no sidewalk on the west side of School Street. This would also include, there is an ADA curb ramp on School Street, but there's no ADA curb ramp on the other side. So it would also include a new ADA curb ramp and a new crosswalk. And after we do this job, we would try to repave West Center Street next spring.
Yeah, the sidewalks certainly, appear very narrow and in poor condition. Is there, would there be any easements needed? Like, I'm just thinking of that last picture, it looked like somebody's fence was like halfway into the
No,
sidewalk.
we'll be moving into the road, and
Okay.
that's why we've had discussion about, we're going to narrow the road just slightly.
Got it.
We wanted to avoid the trees, we wanted to avoid the private property, because getting right-of-way is very time-consuming.
That's why I was asking, because of
Yeah.
the timing, if we had to do easements or where that
No,
was. Okay.
We don't. But it does make a case to probably go back and take out the sidewalk on the other side, so you gain the foot, it's less than a foot actually, but we gain whatever we lost from the roadway and clean that up as well.
Okay.
The project is just under $200,000. Our bids have been coming back good, so I'm hopeful that that's going to come in under engineer's estimate. And we do want to finish it before the concrete plants close, the cement plants close.
And when is that?
That's in November.
Okay.
So
So you
we'll
think
do
there
this-
would be enough time to?
Oh,
like,
yeah,
The
absolutely.
people that are bidding can commit to the timeline and?
They're going to
okay.
be given 45 days.
Okay.
And if they don't finish, they're liquidated damages, so there's a real
And-
cost.
And we will not be using the people that were doing the rubber mats at?
No, fortunately, they don't do
I'm
sidewalks.
kidding, I'm
It
kidding.
appears they don't really do we play areas either. No, they're on the super bad list right now, which is an official list at the city of
Yeah.
Beacon. That means
Super
you're not
bad,
coming
do not
back.
use. All right, no, I'm just
Looks
kidding.
good over there, though.
Yeah, well, I would say all credit goes to Mark Price, who worked around a contractor who just ghosted us. And he went to the various suppliers and took the middleman now. And the benches are still on order over there. They'll be coming in, but he did a great job landing the plane. That was supposed to be done April 12th, and we never even got calls back from Pettinelli Recreation. Yes, if you're listening to this, Pettinelli, you're on the super bad list.
Chris, I just really appreciate you working on these sidewalks projects and this grant from year to year. And while I'm disappointed to hear that other places in Dutchess County won't be able to take advantage of it this year because of the timing that worked out, it's great that through your work that we are still able to take advantage of it this year.
Thanks.
So thank you.
We really have tried to show the county that if you're going to fund something, do it here because we'll get it done. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons the money got held up is because they weren't cycling the money through quick enough. And that wasn't us, that was other communities.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we told them, we'll get it done if you give us the money. We also will be coming to you about a CDBG public hearing to line up the 2025. And I'm trying to get what we're looking at is trying to get this whole area wrapped up. So we're doing the sidewalks on Teller Avenue right now. We've done them on South, and we're looking at and costing out what it might take to do the ones along Wolcott between Teller and South, so that whole square is finalized. And again, I think these investments in the areas that are our lowest income neighborhoods have really helped make those areas look better.
Well, it helps too because a lot of them are very close to the schools.
Yes.
And where,
and public housing.
Yeah, and there's a lot of walking, and so it certainly makes sense. And, in areas where we know people are using a lot of foot or bikes or whatever to get around, that's where we're investing in the sidewalks, so.
Yeah, on that, how do we I know I met with a resident yesterday and looked at Liberty Street between Stone and where the sidewalk is on Forest to Forestall, and there's a good cause for sidewalks needed there, considering it's a double yellow line. And if you're looking at if a parent with a stroller with the kid next to them, they could not be out of the traffic without the cars crossing the double yellow line. It just seems like it makes sense to look at that for sidewalks so the school children can walk to school safely.
I would say there are a bunch of areas where if we had limitless money and limitless time, we should do. We don't have either of those, and it is very difficult to build new sidewalks. We're doing just replacement of sidewalks and expansion of sidewalks on Teller and Fishkill Avenue, and it took 23 years to line that project up. I worked for 3 years to finalize right-of-way that was already partially done, but we had to acquire little slivers of land from a bunch of neighboring properties. I would just say we have so many existing sidewalks that are failing to meet ADA compliance, that look terribly, that don't have good connections, or there's a little piece that's missing. I again would keep prioritizing around these key areas rather than doing areas where they never had sidewalks. And
they have sidewalks. They do have some sidewalks, and then it just ends.
Yeah, but I'm just saying that sidewalk has never extended. Again, I lived over there 30 years ago. I'm fully aware of where the sidewalks ended. And if you lived beyond the sidewalks, again, there wasn't an expectation that somebody's going to build them. They should have been built when it was those neighborhoods were done. And the fact that they weren't has made it really complex to go back and put sidewalks in. We're talking about, 600 plus feet of sidewalk costing $200,000. We don't have to deal with drainage changes. I don't have to buy right away. Again, it's a much longer process, and there's no way I can do that process through CDBG. Like, I'm almost behind for next year because I don't have a tentative project already going. By the time I would build new projects, that's a minimum of 2 to 3 years. And again, like we should do, when we're not doing $40 million in capital projects like we are right at this moment, I'd love to do a sidewalk study to prioritize those things.
Right, because we do have sidewalk money in the budget each year.
We have it in the capital plan, but it has to then be funded, and in the last capital plan, it was presented to us at 50% of what it was the previous year. So we had 500,000 in there, now it's 250,000.
But I mean, again, we struggled to get this designed in time to even go to bid. I want you to understand, like, every day we're prioritizing things. I've had to push back South Avenue Park. The project, I mean, just the project across the street has taken so much in terms of our staff hours, attorney hours, finance department. We're going as fast as we can. We've never built so much stuff as we have in the last year. I mean, this is a record pace. So, again, do I want new sidewalks everywhere? Absolutely. But you kind of have to just say, like, what can you actually get done? You know, everybody has an idea.
Priority.
Yeah, well,
You know,
if you
it's
don't
just
prioritize, you don't
priority.
get anything done.
I just want to add that I don't think I understand the operational complexity of doing a new sidewalk versus an old one, but I think that safety should be the #1 consideration. And if the lack of a sidewalk creates a safety issue, it should be given equal
Well,
weight.
Dan, we have a lack of sidewalks in areas that have sidewalks because they haven't been maintained over a period of 40 years. I can't catch up on 40 years of deferred maintenance, you know, overnight. But we're making a heck of a run at it right now. Just look at the sidewalks on Fishkill-Teller Avenue.
it's great.
But I'll tell you, that's a Herculean task. My staff is complaining every day about how much they're having to do. So again, it just is not even like on the radar right now to do new sidewalks. I mean, drive around town. We've got about half of the town ripped up right now, which is causing, it's good because we're investing, but it's causing a lot of havoc too. Again, we'll try to do them as much as we can, but it makes sense to replace in kind because those sidewalks are no good. I mean, look at the sidewalks in front of Hedgewood.
Yeah.
Those are no good. You have sidewalks, we're going to talk about building new sidewalks in a neighborhood where people moved in and there were no sidewalks, and then you have persons with disabilities that are riding in the road because we haven't fixed the sidewalk. You know, we want to talk about bike lanes out there. You can't even get people with disabilities off the road because we don't have a safe pedestrian system. So it's about prioritizing, and we do that every day. I had to push 2 projects back to next year so that I didn't, you know, overwhelm our capacity here. And again, as Fishkill-Teller and the firehouse are done, those projects were decades in the making, and I hope it opens up additional bandwidth.
Thank you. I just wanted to put it out there.
I had a car-related question. Could you remind me what the parking situation is on this stretch, just recognizing that we're nearing the street a tiny bit? Are we concerned at all that that will create any traffic issues?
The engineer thought we could manage it. There is parking on the street. There's not a lot of parking on the street. It's a low speed limit area. It's most of it is a 15 mile an hour. So people navigate like they do through many of the constrained streets.
I have heard that this is a strip where there is some speeding, maybe on motorbikes or something, but I think when you narrow a street, you're actually slowing traffic. So
Yeah.
by narrowing it, we'll probably reduce it.
I've driven the street quite a bit myself and haven't had any issues, but just wanted to raise it as a question.
I mean, we looked at whether we could take the other sidewalk out. I didn't do that immediately because, one, there's always somebody that complains about it, and I just need to get this project done or I'm going to lose the county money. That's it, right? We got it. You either act in time or you don't get the money. And so we can go back and make it better and take another look at removing the other sidewalk. Because it's essentially useless. I mean, you come to 2 poles in the middle of it. If you're in a wheelchair, good luck even getting off that curb.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to seeing the bids for the
Me
project.
too. So
And,
Wednesday morning, we'll find out. The last few bids have been really good. It seems like work is, people are getting hungry for work again. We're getting bids well to the south of us.
Good.
So I'm hoping to come back with a good set of bids.
Excellent.
And on this road, if you look at the measurements, where they're taking it away is actually equalizing it further down the road. So it was 24 feet wide. So by taking it, it's kind of lining up more with closer to where School Street is. So they probably realize there's not much impact of narrowing it.
And it really isn't much. We're narrowing it by, I think it came to 8 inches.
Yeah, it's not a lot. Lee, do you have anything to add?
No, I'm good, thank you. I know this section of road really well. Glad we got it done.
Everybody good to move on?
Yeah.
All right, and our item number 4, last item on our agenda, proposed amendments to the 2024 budget.
Yes, so we have 3 amendments that we're proposing to the general fund. The first is the last round of child care worker bonuses that were provided through New York State. So New York State put aside a tranche of money that has come out in 6 payments for child care workers as a retention bonus for being frontline workers during COVID. This is the last payment, so we're proposing to increase, to put on our books the state aid that is being received, and then we are paying out those bonuses and the Social Security to 10 of our staff who are eligible for that. And this is the final round of these, so.
So, sorry, this helped them get childcare?
No, this was basically for child care workers. People do like after-school programs and other things to make up for the low wages and to say, you know, we want you to stay in this position. So it was, you know, it was a helpful thing. These, you know, people work for not so much money, and they should make a lot more money, and this was a way of recognizing that. The second one is the payouts for the retirement pay for Chief Frost and Detective Lieutenant Johnson, and we are taking out $59,381 from retirement, and then we got an additional one-time revenue from the state that we're going to put in to cover the gap that we had, which is $178,534, which was the temporary municipal assistance that the state granted us. So that's the exact amount that we got as a boost this year.
And that's a grant from the state? We don't have to pay that back? It's not a loan?
No, that's correct. We don't have to pay it back. We get AIM funding every year, and when they did the state budget last year, they recognized that that hadn't gone up in a long time. They didn't want to raise it necessarily because, you know, then you have to pay it every year. So they did like a one-time bonus to help municipalities out.
I see. So this wasn't specifically for this, but this is how we're using that aid that we got from the
It's
state.
just a general revenue that we haven't put on our books yet. So we figured, okay, you know, these were large payouts. You know, Sands was here for 40 years, so, and we didn't expect both of them to retire in the same year. So that helped, you know, that state one-time funding really helped. And hopefully we don't have any, right now we're not looking at any police retirements next year if things go well. And then the third item is overtime. We've been talking about the fact that we are currently 7 officers down out of a force of 36. We have 2 that don't count towards shift yet because they're still field training. We have 2 others who are injured, and we have one, the one we just hired, of course, is in the academy. So we are not covering our shifts right now. We are, just to get minimum shift, we're paying 80 hours of overtime a week. And so we extrapolated out how much more we would need to get through the end of the year. That's $193,100. We luckily, because we have 7 vacancies, we have that money in the regular salary line. So we'll just move that over. Now, in the future, we've been talking how to get the overtime back into the regular salary line and normalize this and get back up to full staff. But this is what's necessary. So it moves up police overtime from what was budgeted, which is $842,000, to $1,031,000. And it's probably a realistic number. And we're going to try to manage it as best we can. But just to cover shifts again, we don't have enough people to cover them. So.
Okay. I don't
So
have any
we would
questions.
bring those next week and with a resolution.
All right, great. That is all we have on the agenda. So we will have our regular city council meeting next Monday,
The 16th.
September 16th
Yeah.
at 7 PM.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In our next workshop, can we, now that we've finished the parking minimums and good cause eviction, it looks like the next thing on our priority list is water body protections of our priority list for this year. Is there anybody interested in taking up water body protections in a couple of weeks? I can give you the meeting where we last talked about it. It was a year and a half ago.
I would
Yeah.
be interested in seeing the last meeting.
Yeah, I would, I can't believe it's been that long, but yes.
Yeah.
I am still interested in water body protection.
All right. I'll share around the links to the last meeting.
Okay,
Yeah, great, thank you.
Thank you.
all right. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Pam.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you.
Thank you, good night.